This past week, we had a bit of an issue. If you attended my webinars in 2020, I went through some of the privacy plugins that you can use for your browser. You might remember that one of them was something called the Great Suspender. Highly recommended at the time. Got to add that in there because I don't want you to just go grab it. It was recommended. I used it like extensively on a bunch of different browsers because what the Great Suspender did is save your machine's memory, CPU, frankly, even a little bit of disk I/O. When you were on a tab on your web browser, your tab would just respond normally. Everything looks good. But if you're like me, you probably opened another tab or maybe another window and then another tab or another window. You just dig deeper and deeper as you're looking into something, trying to figure something out. You might have 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 tabs open. Each one of those tabs represents a different thread, a different process basically on your computer. That means it's using memory, it's using CPU, and it might be also hitting your disk, using your disk. The Great Suspender said, wait a minute now, you haven't used this tab in whatever you set it for. I usually had it about 15 minutes. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a snapshot of this page. I am going to just release all of the resources that were associated with the page. If you go back to that tab, all you have now is a snapshot, just a picture of what was on the page. So you can see what was on the page, and depending on how you configured the Great Suspender, I had it set up so that if I activated a tab again, it would automatically reload that page. You could have had it so that if you got to that picture and you really wanted it, you'd click on it and it would reload the page. Very handy. It allowed you to have hundreds potentially of tabs open, quote unquote, when in fact they weren't open and they weren't using hardly any resources at all. The Great Suspender this last June was sold. The original person who wrote this thing, and it's a great little, really great actually, little piece of software, decided that he wanted to make some money off of it. Why not? He sold it. It's unclear as to who actually owns it or controls it right now and who he sold it to, because the name of the account, the developer account, is Great Suspender. So that's not going to help you at all. It started showing some signs of what Google and people are calling malice under this new ownership. There was a thread in GitHub that was published in November, and GitHub is where so much of this code is stored, right? And it started to show some signs of, frankly, of malice under this new ownership. They said that a new version contained malicious code that tracked users and manipulated web requests. Now, the Great Suspender did normally manipulate web requests in order to keep everything flowing and smooth. So you might go to a website and then it suspends it, and it might use a different URL, and the URL is going to cause the Great Suspender inside your browser to be called. So I'm not sure what they mean about the manipulation here, but Google removed it. It's gone like that. No warning or anything else, just within the last week. They completely removed the Great Suspender, not just from the store. They removed it from your machines where you were using it. It said this extension contains malware. That's the only warning they gave. That is the only background they gave. They really haven't said a whole lot. People, by the way, who were using the Great Suspender were really left in a lurch because any suspended tabs you had were lost. How's that for a terrible thing? Absolutely terrible. There is a Reddit thread out there that you can see. They talk about how you can get your tabs back. If you had followed my advice back then and put it on, good for you. However, the problem is that it turned out to ultimately be malicious. So that's a big deal.